place? You're hot, aren't you, Barbara? Are you really uncomfortable?
No.
As Barbara, she was in the Grand Military Stories and Books, and thinking about what she remembers as a child
Yeah.
about attending school and church.
Yeah. I think that's
I know she only 18 months, but I'm sure as an early teenager.
This don't have anything to, you're not on, are you?
No.
Oh.
How long were you treasurer?
Well, 25 years.
Good heavens. I guess you did see some changes in money coming into the church.
I was treasurer. Are we on?
We're on now.
Oh.
We just started. Right when she asked you how long you'd been treasurer.
Well, I've been treasurer 25 years. And I did it before, not to try to be somebody, hey, I'm the treasurer of the church. I did it because I loved God. And I was trying to serve God in my own way. So,
It's a long time in that position.
the biggest thing while I was serving treasurer was, I looked it up last night, in 1957, we needed a new roof for the church. I looked it up last night. At that time, we had 771 shares of the Manhattan Bond Fund. We're now probably worth a lot of money. And the clerk in the church, Miss Agnes Jessen and I, wanted to keep those bonds. And we needed a new roof desperately. The church was leaking in 2-3 places. And so the standing committee wanted to cash those bonds in and pay for the roof. And the clerk in the church, Miss Agnes Jessen and I, wanted to keep those bonds on the dividend and borrow the money. And somehow now we're paying the bank back. But we were outvoted. And the church cashed them in 1957, 771 shares. And so my aunt and I, well, my sister and I, insisted that if we put in the church record that we were vigorously opposed to cashing those things in. We were heartbroken or they were involved and paid this dividend and helped support the church. But the standing committee voted solemnly against the clerk and I. So we lost that battle. That was about the only battle I lost as treasurer. That was in 1957. And we put on a new roof on the church, a slate roof.
Did get a slate roof.
And paid for it, but the money was not by cashing in the bond.
So we've just recently had a new roof put on. So in the course of your being associated with Circular, you've seen 2 new roofs go on the church.
You what now?
So you've seen 2 new roofs go on Circular, or
Well,
more.
I've seen 2 new roofs, right? The 1957, they put the slate roof on, all slate. And then just recently at the Hughesville, they put on the new roof, the copper roof. So I've been through 2 roofs.
I bet not many people can say that.
Right.
Barbara, I know that you had relatives prior to your birth who were members of Circular. As you were growing up as a youngster, did you hear any stories that they might have told about their remembrances of Circular?
I don't really remember any.
Don't remember
Sorry.
any them talking about fundraisers or who did the fundraising at Circular?
No, I really don't remember any.
When you were on up to an age where you could actually remember, say, in your early teens, what types of things were going on at Circular? Did you attend Sunday school?
Oh, yeah. My grandmother played the piano for Sunday school, and my aunt, Agnes, she was a Sunday school teacher. And then as I got older, I was a Sunday school teacher. But we didn't have the training or anything that the Sunday school teachers get now. So anybody that you could get to be a Sunday school teacher was one. But
What level of children did you teach at Sunday school?
different ages, just wherever you were needed, you pitched in. Because we had children of our own, and everybody wanted to have all the bases covered as far as ages. So.
Was the service, your early remembrances services when you were an early teenager, how were they different? Were things done differently? Communion or any other kind of traditional things that are done around the church?
Well, the communion was like I mentioned earlier, where we all just sat down in the pews and this is strictly not for the camera, but back in those days I really wasn't that interested. You know, we came to church, we had a good time and all that, but that wasn't one of our main.
Didn't give it a lot of thought otherwise, huh? Yeah. I think everybody probably goes through that too, actually.
You want to tell them about that Christmas? You'll already have family.
We always had that was one thing they believed in doing, was when you were a child, was having Christmas and Easter programs where you learned all these recitations and you were in the plays, and you always had your part that you had to learn. And every Christmas we'd have a Christmas program where we'd have Santa Claus come, and he'd always bring the children oranges or nuts. And boy, we thought that was wonderful to get a gift like that. I mean, nowadays children have that all the time, but when I was a child they didn't. That was a treat.
Where did these programs take place?
Lower Lance Hall. We had a platform in the hall, and we had the programs there. We didn't use the upper Lance Hall much because it was rented out to a group. I think it was called Musical Art Club or something, and so we didn't really have the use of the upper Lance Hall, the Graham Thompson Hall. We used the lower Lance Hall. But that was, and then our Easter programs we'd like have in the sanctuary. But and then of course you'd have the Easter egg hunt outdoors. And
Oh yeah, they still do that. Still have Easter egg hunt for the children.
well, we had it over on this side of the church, around the steps and all. Every Easter Monday, we'd have that.
Let's see.
You know, I haven't asked anybody else this, but do you remember, have any members of the church been run for elective office? Or has anybody from the church been
Think of
elected?
anybody.
Yeah.
I don't remember the church being involved in any of the political things, like maybe somebody who was for a certain issue, and the church would be in favor of that person being elected. I don't remember that. Of any time that I can remember, we were talking about that last night, I don't remember any time of anyone that the church actually supported to try to get elected into the city's council or mayor or governor or anything like that. There was never, I don't think they were ever involved in any political thing. Do you remember?
Not that I remember.
It's so interesting because the church has been involved in helping a lot of people in a lot of different ways, but never had a political leaning or thought at all. It just seems to be a non-political place that's more interested in helping people than gaining power.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Different approaches to getting things done.
I would ask to you, what is Circular's, what was the hardest time for Circular's greatest trial?
Well, of course, Hugo. And we also had a fire at one time, but that mostly did damage in the lecture room downstairs with smoke damage in the church. But and of course we went through, like every other church in Charleston, the polio epidemic, where we had to do away with the Sunday school because you couldn't have a group of people together, and we'd maybe have no more than 20 people. In fact, some Sundays it were the smaller crowds, is 12 of us here for church, and we'd meet in the lecture room.
Barbara, the polio epidemic, was
That was in 41?
41 and 42.
Ernest had it, so he knows.
Yeah, then 41 and 42, and 40, in the early part of 42, I got polio, and I had a long struggle with that, but that's not part of the church history. But anyway, I did have polio.
But it was in the city of Charleston.
But the whole city was, a lot of people were very afraid to you go anywhere when there's a large crowd, and especially with children. But I was 19 years old at the time, and I got polio, and I had a long struggle with it. But some of the memorable things in the church, was like how you young people took over after Hugo did so much damage to the Sunday school building, land hall in the church, and you're not involved with the insurance companies, you got the money that we needed, and you restored the church, and then how you have got people up there to restore the graveyard. I think that's a great tribute to the church for the graveyard looked so bad. And then Vernon Elliott, with the work that he's done, taking some of the members of the church up to Massachusetts and dismantling that organ and bringing it down here. And with the help of the members of the church and maybe a couple of hired people, he was the brains behind it, and all the nine got this beautiful organ put together. My hat comes off again to all these people, young people who have worked so hard to restore the church to the beauty that we have now. We have a beautiful church. And then of course the ceiling has been done over. Wow. The church is beautiful now. And it was a lot of hard work there.
Oh, undoubtedly. This ceiling has been done over? Is this the...
Many times.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
We had the ceiling painted in the 50s by 2 professional painters. And 6 months later it came down. I mean, it's not appealing. And whatever they done, they didn't do the right thing. But it was a disaster, wasn't it, Barbara? But anyhow.
Where did the painters go? Could you locate them to come back and do it right? Did the painters take off after the job was completed?
Well, I'm sorry, now what?
I was wondering what happened to the painters who...
They came back. And we've done it again, but it was never satisfactory. I mean, the feeling wasn't satisfactory until the young man that we hired to go up there and do it. I don't remember his name, but
Is that Dyke?
yeah.
Jim Dyke.
Yeah, so the ceiling was never, the ceiling had been painted a couple of times, but it was never done satisfactory until he came in and took over, and he did it right. He apparently knew what to do, and he did it. But the first time we had it painted, was a nightmare.
It must have been.
You know.
If it came down, is that it actually?
Yeah.
came
Then the
down?
field and flaked off, and it was worse than before.
I mean, I'm sort of getting this vision of paint falling on people as they're sitting in the pews on Sunday. Is this what was happening?
Yeah, it flaked off into the pews. Not like rain, of course, but
Yeah.
you know.
It wasn't none. I mean, it was just a bad situation. The two gentlemen that painted the company, evidently one familiar with painting all plaster, and they didn't do what was necessary to do. But they did come back and repaint it, but it wasn't satisfactory.
Well, it sounds like you all last night were talking about this very thing today, talking to us about your memories of Circular. What were some other things that you discussed last night that maybe we've touched on a little bit or we haven't even hit on today?
I think we covered most of them. But
You know. And we sat up till about 11:30 last night, going over some of the things, and Mom was saying, "Now, Ernest, you can't memorize this now. You're supposed to be spontaneous." I said, "Well, I don't know." I did look up some of the dates. You know, like 1957, when we cashed in those bonds. I wanted to make sure I had the year right on that.
Yeah, that's something you would remember, I'm sure, because it had such an impact on you.
Well, you've shared a lot with us.
Yeah, this has been great.
You know, anything else?
Got some good memories.
We're on our way.
Okay. All right. I guess if we could start by you all each introducing yourselves and giving just a description of how you are currently associated with Circular Church.
All right.
I'm Mary Thomas. I'm a parish associate, a member of council. I'm also a representative from council through the personnel committee, a sometimes teacher in a church school, and a member of the racism and peace committees. I think that does me.
I'm Bert Keller and have served as a pastor of the church since approximately 1974.
Okay. Now, each of you are going to be coming from different experiences, so just address it from that angle. But when you first came to Circular, what was the size of the congregation?
I'm not sure exactly what the size of the congregation. I think perhaps it may have been about 300 people. I'm not certain about that, but I think it may have been about 300 people. That was 19. I first began to visit in 1989. I became a member in 1990, but I was visiting for almost a year before we joined. About 11 months before we joined, we visited.
I began coming to Circular probably in late 1969 or in 1970. I was in Charleston as campus minister for the Presbyterian Church, and my responsibilities with students occupied me during the week, and I was sometimes invited to preach in various churches in the presbytery on Sundays, but I found that on those Sundays that I was not engaged to be preaching some other place, that I most frequently came here. And there were several reasons for that. One was a friendship with Bob Boston. A second one was that of all the churches that I visited in Charleston, I felt probably most comfortable here. I had a beard at that time. This was in 1969 or 1970, at the height of the campus revolutions, and I was a campus minister associated with college students, so I was regarded with suspicion. by a number of churches and found them a little bit standoffish. I don't think they were very sure of me, but in this congregation I never felt that kind of standoffishness at all. It just didn't make any difference. So I found myself coming pretty frequently, and at that time, I suppose, in the very early 70s, the congregation was very small, and as best I recall, the average attendance in church on Sunday was probably around 40 or 50. So it was quite a different scene at that time than it is now.
It has changed. It goes from 40 or 50 to about 300. Bert, you might be better able to address this given the length of time, but how about demographic changes of which you're aware? Ages of the congregational members and occupation, education. Have you seen changes over the years in the demographics of the congregation?
As to the demographics then and now, I have not noticed that much change, actually. I think that when I came, Bob had been pastor of the church for about 2 years, probably a little under 2 years. And in that time, he had taken that core that consisted of the Wingards and the Sharps and the Dukes and several other faithful families, Kitty McIntyre at that time, now Kitty Altman, and some folks like that, and had begun building the church. The church had grown considerably just in those first 2 years. And I think that the people that Bob was bringing was perhaps most instrumental in bringing into the church were people who were relatively young. There were children in the church at that time. And I would say that although it was smaller then, that it still reflected approximately the same kinds of age spans and socioeconomic groups that are in the church today.
Well, I'm interested, and I think a lot of people would be, in what your first impression of circular was when you first encountered it.
My first impression was it feels right. It felt good. I liked what I heard. I liked what I saw. The people were friendly and warm, cordial. And we were invited back each time we'd come. Someone would say, welcome, come back again. And we did. It also reminded me of the church that I left in New York, excuse me, where I was a member. This church is perhaps 1/10 the size, but it certainly is a duplicate almost of that church. And I then felt right at home here. I didn't know right away. I never felt like a stranger in Circular. Yeah. So that's what got me started in Circular. I felt that way.
Great.
And I think Bert had a lot to do with that too. I'd met him before.
I knew Bob before I knew the congregation of the church, and at first probably was not terribly interested in knowing the congregation because I was not, I was a minister and I was a member of the presbytery, and I wasn't really looking for a church home, in the same way that some people might be, but I was looking for a place to worship on Sunday mornings. And I think that the word that probably typifies my response to Circular in those very early years was unpretentious. It seemed to me to be a church that didn't make pretenses. And Bob was a person who made no pretenses. And I appreciated that. There was a simplicity about it, and an honesty, and an openness that I thoroughly appreciated. I do remember one experience that meant a lot to me, and said a lot to me about the church during probably 1970 or 71. At that time, Bob had developed a relationship with some of the hippies in town, the street people. And to the best of my knowledge, he was the only adult establishment type person who had any relationship at all with this underclass of people who were runaways or, were experimenting with drugs or were living communally. There was a lot of that in 1969, 1970. It was all over town. And Bob had a relationship with them, and I had some by virtue of being a campus minister, and so I was working with students and kids. And so we had a lot to talk about. But this church opened Lance Hall to the hippies long about 1970, I guess, when a little coffee shop that they were running over on King Street called The Poet was closed down by the police. The neighbors had complained that it was making too much noise and that drugs were being passed there. So Bob said to Jesse Crenshaw, the head of it, "Why don't you come on over to Circular?" So they did, one evening a week. Bob may have talked about this. And they call it the Poet Other, or the Poet's Other. And the deal was that they would come over to Upper Lance Hall, and people in the church and the community would bring food for their supper, casseroles, other stuff, lots of food there. And in return, they would stick around for what was called in those days a rap session. And Bob would invite various people to come in and rap with them, including the chief of police, Mr. Conroy, and the head of the narcotics squad, Lieutenant Oliver, and Sue Hawkins, who was in charge of health education for the Charleston County Health Department, and people like that who had information that the kids needed, but with whom they had no real relationship. And so they would have some vigorous dialogue up there in Lance Hall between these hippies. Now, I counted one night, and there were 360 kids up there. They packed that place. Wow. Average probably under that, maybe between 100 and 200. But they would eat all the food, and then they would play guitars and do some singing and so forth, and some of them would drift out into the graveyard. And they would stay up there and they would rap with these people. And then one evening, usually once a month, they would have a religious rap. And Bob would talk, or somebody else. And every now and then, they'd have a communion service. And Bob would invite them to come down to the sanctuary, any who chose to. And they would have a candlelight communion, and the kids would play and sing guitars. And in a very simple way, Bob would break bread and pass wine and say the words. And informally, they would have communion together. And I took part in several of those and felt that it was emblematic of the church, that here was a church that seemed to me to be living really at the margin of the establishment, and with a real ministry, a serious engagement with people who were outcasts in society, and that was very appealing to me and helped me to want to become more involved with the church.
That was a time when the term generation gap was made, and the gap was a lack of communication between the generations. And it seems that Bob Boston reached out, and I've seen or heard of Circular doing that or following that tradition over and over again.